All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome. As I keep saying, it's so great to see you all. I hope you're doing well on this chilly day, staying warm and having a relaxing day. Before we begin, I do want to mention some housekeeping items. Next week, we will be hosting Temple Grandin, Dr. Temple Grandin, next Thursday, February 25th at 4 o'clock p.m. on Zoom. And since this may be a highly attended event, we are asking you to sign up on our Google form for a spot. However, we are limited to 300 people, and since space is limited, we're asking you to sign up as soon as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and send the link for her talk in the chat, as well as the poster for her talk as well. Just get that sent in. All right. So now on to our event for today. Julie Prosser is a sixth-year graduate student in the Applied Social and Health Psychology program here at CSU. She's a third-year graduate teaching fellow and has her associate's degree in business, bachelor's degree in psychology, and a master's degree in general psychology. She's planning on graduating this semester with her PhD, so congratulations to Julie. And Julie's current research is on romantic relationships and the ways in which partners communicate through conflict, along with its effects on relationship outcomes for individuals who experience support gaps in the relationships, and how individuals communicate to manipulate others in relationships. This is Julie's second time speaking for PsyChi this year, and we are so thrilled to have her back talking about attraction and the benefits of healthy, supportive relationships in the spirit of Valentine's Day. Without further ado, here is Julie Prosser.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you again for having me for the second time this year. This is my third time talking for PsyChi in the last 6 years that I've been here, so this is exciting for me. So I'm honored to be here, and I'm really impressed that 28 of you have shown up on a snow day. So I'm very thankful for that. So I will go ahead and share my PowerPoint. I always get nervous that I'm going to share the wrong thing. Okay, so this is, again, the second time that I've presented this semester. If you were here for the first one, it's a very different vibe. So the last time I presented, it was right around Halloween, and I was talking about serial killers, and now we're just doing a full 360 here, talking about relationships that are healthy. So I like to think that that makes me a very well-rounded person. Other people may have different ideas of what that says about me, but that's a whole other conversation. So today we're going to talk about relationships, specifically romantic relationships, again, because it's Valentine's Day yesterday, so in the spirit of things. And I'm going to basically present this almost like a research talk. So again, the hope is that I'm graduating this semester, possibly in the summer, but I'm also on the job market. And sometimes during interviews, they ask to do job talks and research talks. And so I'm kind of using this as practice. We'll see how it goes. So I've done a lot of research across the spread of relationships, and so I'm going to draw on some of these studies that I've done and been a part of. Okay, so there's different types of relationships, and all of these can be healthy or unhealthy, any variation within there. And so some of the relationships that usually come up for people are, I have pictures from my own life, but obviously you have your own relationships. So the first group that I'm showing here are my coworkers, fellow students in the grad program here at CSU. Some of these people have graduated, since moved on. Other people are still here trying to work hard. But you have varying closeness with these relationships, right? So the coworkers that you have, the fellow classmates, you may know them, you may have, some sort of idea about who they are, but they're not necessarily going to be equal relationships across those bonds. Other relationships, like your very close friends, usually this group is smaller than everyone you meet in class, but again, these bonds are a little bit different. You share things with them, you share experiences with them, and again, can be healthy or unhealthy. Relationships, these are my siblings. Obviously, parents fit in with this, your step family, your half siblings, children of your own if you have them, right? A lot of these relationships are much different than your friendships and different from your coworkers. And then finally, which is the talk for today, is romantic relationships, very close bonds with close others. This is me and my partner and our dog at Christmas time. And so all of these relationships serve different purposes for the people who are involved in them. Sometimes there's just simply informational support. So this is most likely going to be from people like your coworkers, fellow students, right? Learning things from them. They're giving you very, very specific types of support and information. Others can be emotional support, just being there for you, right? Offering those services of empathy and any variation between that. Now, sometimes relationships are not always reciprocal. So you may have feelings for someone that they don't quite return or not returning in the same intensity, or you might not have the same goals for those relationships. And so even though we know that some of these relationships can be straining, right? They're not going to be as supportive as we'd like them to be. So in the introduction, we were talking about support gaps, right? So you may want more support or not as much support as you're receiving. And so this can create some strain on the relationship. However, we still persist, right? We still seek out this companionship from other people. And why do we do this? The main theory behind most of my research is this fundamental need to belong. And this stems from a paper that was back in 1995, which now I realize is a long time ago. But this fundamental need to have the sense of belongingness with another person and to have that companionship is super important. And it has a lot of benefits in the literature that's suggesting if we feel like we belong, that we're included in our group, whatever that may be, we have higher self-esteem, more confidence in ourselves, more happiness, more life satisfaction. But this need to belong does not only apply to romantic relationships. And so though the focus of the talk today is romantic relationships, I do want to stress that it does not only apply to those bonds with people, right? We talked about all the different types of relationships in the last slide. We still seek out companionship in a specific way. It's also important to say at this point that we don't all seek out romantic relationships either. So there's a whole line of research that is not generally talked about, but I try to sneak it in as much as possible in my different classes. So this woman on the slide is Dr. Bella DePaulo, and she has a line of work on those who are single at heart. And these individuals don't care about romantic relationships. It's not to say that they don't have sexual desires, right? Because romance and sex are different. We hope that they align at some point, but they don't have to. And so for people who are single at heart, they don't have this desire for romance or romantic relationships. They don't have a need or any sort of desire to get married. And so her line of research really highlights this diversity in motivations for relationships. But even if you don't seek out a romantic relationship or a romantic partner, you still have this fundamental need to belong at some level, right? So your friendships, your families, your close connections are all still important, just not in a romantic sense. So I say all that knowing that romantic relationships is our focus today. So we're going to dive into that. The first question is, where does it start, right? How do you build a foundation? How do you build on a romantic relationship? How do you start out? And my line of research focuses on the starting point in initial interaction, specifically with disclosure and communication. So you meet somebody for the first time, generally the expectation is to disclose something about yourself, right? The first day of class, you're supposed to tell the whole class things about yourself. And there's this question about how much you should disclose and what the types of things are that are appropriate to disclose and what the impact is on other people's perceptions of you. So this goes back to impression management, your self-presentation, your sense of self in general, right? How you view yourself, what you choose to disclose. And the issue here is that there should be a line, right? That there's at some point going to be too much disclosure too soon, and that will have detrimental impacts on a relationship. So I started to build on this idea and did some research. And a lot of the lab studies that I found, where these lab studies would have you interact with a partner, they would have a conversation, and there'd be general outcome measures that are listed, But the consensus with these lab studies is that disclosing intimate things is good. So the more intimate you can connect with another person, the better off you'll be, the more positive evaluations they'll provide for you, etc. If you're interested, I have a whole list of citations to back that claim. So the general consensus, again, is that intimate disclosure is a good thing. There are benefits. However, there's this whole other line of research. I coined the term field studies. Looking back, it was not a good term, but that's what I used, so we're going with it. So in these field studies, they all said that intimate disclosure is bad. And so again, I have more citations for that. Now, the difference between these is that in these lab studies, there's this idea that the participant is required to respond to their partner. So you're in this paradigm, someone's disclosing to you, you have to disclose something back. And so in that specific circumstance, receiving a lot of intimate disclosure is a good thing. And the thought behind that is you now have enough to go off of, right? You know enough about this person to be able to respond in some meaningful way because you have to, you're in the circumstance, what else are you going to do? In the field studies, these participants are observing two other people having a conversation. So they are not the recipient of that disclosure. They're simply observing a conversation and evaluating it. And so when you're observing people who are disclosing really intimate information, as a third party observer, you're saying that's uncomfortable, right? That's not normal. We don't think good things about these people. So specifically, the evaluations from this intimate disclosure from field studies tends to provoke some sort of anxiety in the person observing. And so they end up saying that the people who are disclosing intimate information, they're behaving in a socially unacceptable way. So they say this behavior is unacceptable. The disclosure themselves are viewed as inappropriate, maladjusted, they seem unusual, and they even go so far as to say they're less intelligent, less honest about themselves, and even more anxious as a disclosure. So really bad outcomes, right? That's not the type of impression that you want to make on someone when you're trying to build a relationship. Okay, so that was the first point. Lab studies require participants to respond, field studies are different. There's also a debate about what intimate means. And so some studies say that intimate disclosure means that you're just saying more about yourself, and low intimacy means that you're just not saying very many details at all. Other studies say that intimate disclosure often overlaps with negative information. So things like, I have a chronic disease, my parents got divorced yesterday, my grandma died. These really intimate details about your life often overlap with being very negative. And so the thought here is it because you said something intimate, or is it because you just laid a really heavy burden on me to now cope with, right? What is really the mechanism behind this negative attitude? So I transitioned in my master's thesis. So I took this whole literature and I said, okay, I'm going to study this. I'm going to figure out what exactly is going on here. Not yet published. I have to expand on it, which I'll get into, but I have at least a picture of the title. So in my master's thesis, I'm trying to, again, figure out intimate disclosure, good or bad. And so I came up with a design that examined the effects of self-disclosure on liking. So if I disclose something, what's the effect of liking on attraction? When specifically the level of intimacy is manipulated and the participant's role is manipulated. And so the way that this panned out was that we had 3 different levels for participant role. So either the participants were required to respond, or they thought they were required to respond to their partner. They were told that they would not have the option to respond, or they were given a choice. So I'm kind of removing this obligation, trying to manifest the difference between lab and field studies. And then I manipulated the intimacy of the message. And so this was a between subjects design. They only were in one of these special conditions. And then our outcomes were how similar you feel to that person and how much you like that person. Now, for the actual study, we had 110 participants after we excluded some outliers and other weird things that happened. The average age was almost 19 years old, so it's a classic college sample. 89.1 were non-Hispanic white and 85.5% were women. Those of you who know things about research methods, these demographics are not great. This is not generalizable. This is what you get when you're at a Catholic school in Ohio. You get a bunch of white women. So hopefully future directions is to get a more diverse sample, right? To get some generalization here. But for the procedure, we had participants come into a lab. They were told that their partner, who was down the hall in a different room, who didn't actually exist, this person was writing a get to know you message. So they're already working on this message to disclose to the participant. There was a computer alert that came up that said the message is ready, right? The participant submitted their message, it's ready to be viewed. And then at that point, they were given instructions for what their role would be. So this was that first manipulation. So they were either expected to respond, they were told they couldn't, or again, they had that choice to make at the end of the study. They then read either the high or low intimate message. This message was pre-written and pre-tested in pilot studies. If you're interested in that process, we can talk about it after the talk. It's just too detailed to get into right now. It was a long process to get to this message. But so they read this information thinking that their participant or their partner had written it, and then they complete these outcome measures. So the participant never actually responded to their partner, even though they were told that they had to or not. So some people were very confused at the end of the study. So turns out the role didn't matter. It did not make any difference whether they were told they should respond or not, or given a choice. Intimacy did have an effect though. So we have a main effective intimacy, no main effective role, and no interaction. So specifically for intimacy, the higher the intimacy, so the high intimate message brought about higher liking. So those who read this high intimate disclosure ended up liking that participant more compared to a low intimate condition. Regarding the similarity as an outcome, it starts to get a little confusing, but I have an explanation. So in the high intimate disclosure condition, participants felt less similar to that person, which actually goes against all the literature about similarity and disclosure, right? So usually the pattern is that the more intimate disclosure, the more similarity that is present. But that was not the case for this study. However, the more similar they felt, this is what was driving that liking. And so the thought process behind this is that it's possible that the details that were included in that highly intimate message was not generalizable to the whole student population that we were having in our study. So some of the intimate details were what their GPA was, what their major was, what their family life was like. And so it's possible that, you know, not everybody could relate to that type of information. And so it didn't necessarily mean that they didn't like them anymore. It just meant, I don't really feel similar to you, right? But if they were able to connect on some of those things, that also drove that high liking. So what are the explanations for why the role didn't matter? Who knows? I do have suggestions. So the first one is that participants may have assumed that they'd be forced to respond regardless of what the instructions were. And I think this potentially because the title that I presented to the participants indicated that there would be an interaction. So it was all talking about how you interact with people. So it could be that, you know, the instructions that I gave were not enough to override the salience from the title. And then participants don't often listen, right? So you're giving instructions to them, you're telling them what to expect next. They don't listen, they just say, give me a survey, I'll figure it out later. So it's possible that they just didn't hear me or didn't pay attention. Another reason is potentially that participants just felt bad that the partner already had to disclose. And so they were connecting with them on that level to say, I really feel bad that you had to write this message and I don't have to. So I like you for putting in the effort, right? So it didn't really matter how they'd responded. One that I literally just thought up of when I was making this lecture, and I think is the real reason is to why this role didn't matter, is that all participants still received the disclosure. So in my attempt to compare lab and field studies, I did not truly compare the field study conditions. So in these other studies that said intimate disclosure was bad, they didn't receive the disclosure themselves. They were just observing two other people. So it wasn't really a direct comparison as to how I originally intended. So hopefully in the future, I can remedy that issue with a future study. And then I already kind of mentioned this with the similarity, saying that the details of that high intimacy condition may have just been too specific, right? So it did more to separate them than to bind them together. But again, it's a question of what intimacy means, right? So there's still kind of this underlying consensus that hasn't been met yet. So it's a need for the field. But that's my my general summary for that. Okay, so you like somebody, you had this initial interaction, you disclosed intimate information, things are going well. Now, what do? Sometimes expressing attraction can cause a lot of discomfort. So some people just choose to not express it at all. They run away from attraction. They run away from flirting. They're really bad at it. Other people take it a little bit too much extreme and they're just smothering, right? They just attack. They're like, I love you, first date, let's get married. Hopefully we fall somewhere in between these two things, right? Not all of us are going to be on these two dichotomous expressions of attraction. But it fueled my second study that I'm going to talk about. So it depends on a lot of different factors for why you would express certain behaviors. And this is referring to a meta-analysis that was published now it's 3 years ago because it's 2021. But it was in 2018. It was published in Psychological Bulletin. I was a co-author for this study. Took about 4 years and a lot of tears. So I talk about it a lot because I invested a lot of my time and resources into this study. And it has been highlighted on several social media outlets, which is really exciting. So one, right after it got published, it was picked up in this social media article that was shared on Facebook like a million times, mostly by me and my friends. But this was a study that was talking, just a quick summary about the specific signs that are linked with attraction. And just more recently, it was highlighted on TikTok, which is cool. My name is on there. And so I told all my classes about it because I was excited. I talked about it for like 3 days. And obviously I'm still excited about it or else I wouldn't have included it. But I think I'm TikTok famous now, so. But basically this woman was highlighting kind of the nuances of the fact that, psychology is hard. It's not a clear-cut XYZ leads to this outcome. There's a lot of different factors that should be discussed. So I'm going to take you through the process of what we did with this meta-analysis. So when we're displaying attraction, our first step was to actually identify the behaviors in the literature already that other authors and other researchers have decided is associated with attraction. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you're not familiar with what a meta-analysis is, basically we just did an assessment of all the other published literature and we tried to get unpublished data as well. And we're basically assessing what is the strength of all these relationships. So some articles may say, yes, this behavior is associated with attraction. Another article could say, no, it's not. Another one could say, yes, but it's weak, right? And so we've got all this discrepancy in our research. And so the meta-analysis kind of combines all of those things and says exactly how strong is this relationship? What can we get from all of this as a summary? So our first step, again, is to identify which of these behaviors is associated with self-reported attraction in a romantic setting. And so there's a lot. There were a lot that came up. We read a lot of literature in those 4 years. So me and my co-author, we complained a lot, but it led to a good outcome. So I guess it was worth it. I don't know. So things like eye contact, smiling, laughing, mimicking gestures, mimicking choice of words, sentence structure, things like that, how close you stand to someone, how much you talk to them, and then other body associated behaviors. So are you tilting your head when they're talking to you or in response to something that they said? Are you leaning towards them? Are you leaning further away? Closed arms versus open posture, things like that. The classic hair flip, which is what the woman in the TikTok video was trying to say. Oh no, it wasn't the hair flip, it was the head nod. That's what it was. Sorry. She was saying that if you're attracted to someone, you're just supposed to nod your head a lot as they're talking to you and it will increase their attraction. It was debunked. It's not a thing, which I will get to. I just, foreshadowed it. But there's a lot of these different behaviors that if you just read random articles, a lot of these will come up as an indicator of attraction. So the next step was to assess these different theories that try to explain this relationship between behavior and attraction. And there were 3 main theories and models that we were looking at and comparing to see which one is actually the driving force between attraction and behavior. So the first theory or model that we used was called the subjective experience. And so this theory specifically says that behaviors that are associated with attraction should correlate with behaviors that are associated with emotion-specific behavior. So things like happiness, interest, sexual desire. So things that are much more subjective to your own experience, to your emotions. So these behaviors would be things like smiling, head tilt, biting your lip, licking your lips, touching your lips, things like that, because it's much more emotion focused. Also things like eye contact, having wide open eyes, again, to express that emotion. The second theory or model is this generate approach model. And so this is suggesting that we behave in a way that is linked to rewards. So if we expect a reward, meaning we're going to get a phone number, we're going to get asked on a date, someone's going to have a similar attitude that we have, right? They're going to validate us in some way, that's a reward. So if we expect these rewards, we're going to behave in ways that would secure that reward. So we're generating this approach behavior to say, I'm going to stand closer to you, I'm going to sit closer to you, I'm going to place myself in a position that makes me accessible to receive those rewards. So it's a little bit different than that first one of displaying emotion-focused behaviors. So again, standing, sitting, distance is the biggest predictor of this generate approach theory. The third one is all about building trust and affiliation. So it's suggesting that we're developing this interdependence between people. We're building a bond between me and a partner or potential partner. So we're using these behaviors that generate and build trust, and you're showing the other person that you are there for them. You are upholding your end of that relationship. They can count on you. So things like smiling, having eye contact, mimicking them, again, physical proximity. So some of these behaviors are overlapping, right? But the general theme that you get should map on to one of these three, should they be supported. So after we assessed the strength of these relationships, and it was very complicated, when we look back at what these behaviors actually are associated with attraction, we found that it was just the top row. So these specific behaviors are much more significantly associated with self-reported attraction than the ones on the bottom row, which is why the head nod doesn't really mean anything, right? You could do that to your advisor, you could do that to a classmate, it doesn't mean you like them. You might not even be listening to them, right? So it's inconsistent. But these, again, are much more strongly related with that self-reported attraction. So when we look at these behaviors and we map that on to the different theories that we were assessing, they most closely match this third theory. So this suggests that when we're displaying this attraction or we're expressing our attraction, what our motivation is to develop this trusting foundation with another person. And we're much more likely to be successful in that when we engage in those specific behaviors. So overall, we found that these direct displays of attraction is more closely linked with self-reported attraction. So if I say, I like you, I'm then going to smile at you more, I'm going to mimic you more, I'm going to be very direct with my behaviors to display to you that I am attracted to you. However, if there's a fear of rejection, so if you're not really sure how the other person feels, if you think that they could evaluate you negatively in some way, that relationship between direct displays of attraction is weaker. And instead, you start to engage in more indirect behaviors, so you can still flirt subtly, right? You can still kind of express your attraction, but you're not outright coming and saying, I like you, right? Because there's that fear of rejection that comes up. So you still try to express that attraction, but you're not really being very direct, because you could explain it away as, oh, I was just being nice. Sorry that you interpreted it as flirting, right? You can cover it up and kind of protect yourself if you're doing indirect behaviors. All right, so that worked, right? You express your attraction, they like you back, congratulations, woohoo, celebrate your love, but what's next, right? Now you're in a relationship. There's a lot of things that now complicate that relationship. It's not going to be all rainbows and butterflies for the rest of your life. So the first aspect of this that I want to focus on is navigating what your expected roles are in that relationship. I should also say that this specific study that I'm looking at was with only heterosexual couples. So this finding might not map onto other dynamics. Again, limited sample, right? We need to diversify on all levels of research. But this was a paper that it's very complicated figure. I will explain this and make it simpler. But this is a paper that is now currently under review for publication, so hopefully it will be published somewhat soon. So I worked on this with conjunction with a lot of other people across human development, family studies, with social work. I was the only person in psychology on this team, so I was an outlier here. But we were all studying communication and health, right, and relationships, and so it makes sense to have this interdisciplinary work. And so with this study, what we were looking at was what your gender beliefs are and how that matches with your partners and what behaviors you're actually enacting, and then what that means for overall health. So there were three main aspects to this. So one is traditional gender ideology. So the more traditional gender beliefs you hold, meaning the man should go to work, the man should provide for their family, they should be assertive, they should have business sense, they should be independent. The woman more traditionally should stay at home, cook, clean, care for children, right? Be communal, be kind, be meek, whatever. So this is the more general idea for traditional gender ideology. The lower traditional gender ideology, again, means it's more equitable or equal. So you both can go to work, you both can clean, you're both very capable of doing all of those tasks. So we measured how strong these traditional ideologies are, and then we also measured how many behaviors women are engaging in that are traditionally thought of as feminine. So is she actually cleaning and cooking, caring for children? Is she playing into that very traditional gender role for women? Everything in the middle here is cortisol. So cortisol is a hormone in the body that is an indicator of stress. So the more cortisol you have in your body, generally the more stressed you are, though it obviously gets more complicated than that. So the healthy pattern for cortisol is that you wake up, within 30 minutes of waking up, you should see a spike in cortisol. So your cortisol should go up, indicating that you're ready for the day, right? So your body is sufficiently responding to stressors in the day, you're prepared, you're ready to tackle whatever's coming at you. Then throughout the day, it's supposed to generally and gradually get lower. So by the time you are falling asleep at night, you're calm, you're not super stressed, you're able to sleep well and be rested by the next time the morning comes for you to then spike up again and let it have that trajectory throughout the day. So that's the healthy pattern. There's a lot of things that impact that. So what we found in this study was specifically for men, the more traditional the men view gender roles. So again, the man should go to work, the woman should stay home. The more traditional the man is in the relationship having that gender ideology, the lower cortisol at waking for both the man and the woman, which means that they're not having that healthy spike. So the more traditional the man is, the worse it is for both him and his partner, specifically at waking. We also found a flatter slope throughout the day for both the man and the woman related to his traditional gender ideology, suggesting that they're not falling low enough to get to bed, they're not spiking up high enough when they wake up. And so having a man in a relationship that has his traditional gender view is actually not healthy for him or his partner, assuming a heterosexual relationship. Interestingly, for the woman, if she has more of a traditional gender view, it's actually much better for the man, which kind of makes sense, right? Because he doesn't have to have the second shift is what it's called. So he can go to work, he can come home, he doesn't have to worry about taking care of the household, he doesn't have to worry about cleaning and cooking and all that stuff. So it's much better for him health-wise to have a woman who's very traditional in that view. And then we looked at how much, for women specifically, how much their gender role view matches on to the actual behavior that she's enacting. So sometimes those don't match up, right? Viewing that maybe I want a very equal relationship with my partner, but I'm still carrying that second shift when I come home, right? So that's going to be a mismatch. And what we found is that as long as these two things match, it's going to be much healthier for women. So if she believes in a traditional household and she's actually engaging in those traditional behaviors, she's fine, right? She's healthy, everything's good. If she has a gender ideology that's not matching what she's engaging in, that's when it starts to become unhealthy for her. So all that complication equates to those specific significant findings. There's a lot more going on here. There's a lot more that we found, but you can read the paper when it's published if that happens for more information. Okay, so obviously we know that there are certain things that can impact health, right? From that last study, knowing that even your expected roles can change your health. And so I have this slide on here for some key pointers to make a more healthy relationship. The biggest part of this whole slide is sharing is caring. And there's a lot of reasons behind this, and there's a lot of examples how you can express that you care about your partner. And so the first one goes back to that very first study that I talked about. So sharing details about yourself, increasing the intimate self-disclosure can be really beneficial for your partner. Specifically, over time, increasing intimacy. So that doesn't mean that you just bombard your potential partner with all these really intimate details about yourself, right? You have to generate trust across time. Again, relating to my meta-analysis, that we engage in behaviors that build trust, it's going to have a positive outcome. So if you are with your partner for a year and they still don't really know intimate details about you, you're not going to be as close, right? So you're sharing details to show that you care about the other person. You want them to know about who you are. Also sharing your passions and activities. So there's research about, if you have an activity or a hobby that you really enjoy, sharing that activity with your partner is going to help you enjoy it even more. And it's going to show your partner that you care enough about them to include them on those activities and your passion. So it's going to make them feel included, and they're going to feel really special that you shared that activity with them. If they're not physically or emotionally or cognitively able to share in those activities, still disclosing what your experience is about those passions can still have the same effect. This next one is making decisions together. It just, again, shows that you care the impact that it has on your partner. So if you're making decisions independently of your partner, it shows them or demonstrates to them that you don't really care how it affects them. Even if that's not your motivation, that's what they receive, right? So it's the difference between intent and impact. So that's extremely important. Providing and receiving emotional support is really important. So a lot of times people will be able to provide support for their partner, but they have a hard time receiving it, myself included. When I was practicing this with my partner last night, he just kind of raised his eyebrows when I said that. I was like, we're moving on. But receiving that emotional support is also really important, because again, it shows that you trust their judgment, you trust their opinion and their impact that they have on you. This also means that when things are bad, still connect with your partner, right? So share your worries, share your stresses, and engage in that dyadic coping. Simply meaning you can't deal with everything on your own, nor should you have to if you're in that relationship, right? You have people in your corner for a reason, and you need to let them know that you rely on them and that you trust them. These last two kind of go together. I love this last bullet point. But caring about each other's welfare and sharing chores, right? So actually sharing the burden of the stressor, right? Sharing those household chores can be really beneficial, as long as they match on to your gender beliefs, right? So if there's a mismatch there, maybe you shouldn't take that role away from somebody if they feel that it's theirs. But again, sharing details about yourself will help uncover what the expected role is, right? Overall communication is key, and I think that a lot of people know that, but a lot of people don't know how to communicate. So I will get into specifics of this in a second. But overall, the rule is, or the suggestion is, to use more positivity than sarcasm. So a lot of people use sarcasm in their relationship. That's totally fine if that's your thing. Generally, the rule is a 5-to-1 ratio. So if you provide a sarcastic comment, you should also be providing 5 positive comments to kind of offset that. Because if you're only using sarcasm, at some point your partner's probably going to be concerned about how you really view them, right? What your connection is if it's always sarcastic, especially when in conflict. So a lot of people use sarcasm as a defense mechanism, right? To be sarcastic and kind of deflect, which can be really detrimental when you're having conflict with your partner. So being positive, even when you're arguing, is really important. And you do that through displaying support and validation. So I have some examples here of what that looks like. So for support and validation, you can do that without even speaking. You can support your partner just with facial expressions and the way that you orient your body towards them. So being expressive when they're talking. So I know I have head nod on here. It does not mean that you're attracted to them. It just means that you're listening, right? So you have this bond and you're responding to them appropriately. You have more relaxed and open posture, you're facing them, right? You're not facing your body away from them. That shows you're more closed off. And being expressive while you're speaking, not being super monotone, right? Having an engaging conversation. With your content, even when you're in conflict, these things can still come up, right? So you can express warmth, concern, and sympathy towards your partner. So if you're having a conflict, just say, I understand how this might impact you. I'm really sorry that this is impacting you this way, right? I don't want this to be the impact. Let's change it, right? Expressing concern over how it's affecting your partner. Making more positive or neutral attributions. So maybe saying, I know you don't mean it when you do this, right? I don't think that you're a bad person. I don't think that you're intending this to happen, but sometimes this is the case, right? Instead of saying, well, you do this and you do that, and it's all your fault, you need to change, right? Those are more pointed negative attributions. When your partner brings up something about you, I know it's hard, but accept that attribution, right? So validate their point and say, I understand that what I do can be challenging or annoying, and I'm going to work to fix it, right? Because I want this to work, right? Those are the supportive, validating experiences that you can have. And you can still encourage them and flatter and compliment your partner. This is partly what my dissertation is looking at. I'm not going to get too much into that though, because some people may be participants in this call, and I don't want to give away the whole thing. But overall, supporting and validating your partner is really important. And then overall, the motivation behind the behavior drives what the outcome is. So you can engage in the same exact behavior, but for different reasons, and the outcome is drastically different. So the overall motivation should be to make the other person happy, to demonstrate that you care about the other person, not simply just to avoid something bad happening. So classic example goes back to the chores. So if you're doing the dishes, it should be because you want to show your partner that you also care about the way that the house looks, or that you know, maybe your partner has been doing the dishes every day this week, they're stressed, and you do it to alleviate some of that burden. Not simply just to say, well, if I didn't do it, she'd nag me, right? Or we get into an argument because I'm not helping. So avoiding conflict by doing something is not the same as doing it for a positive outcome. So it's the difference between a gain and a loss frame. The other one that came up actually in a conference that I went to a couple years ago was the motivation behind having sex with your partner. So some of the participants responded to say, well, I only had sex last night because if I didn't, I know that they would get mad and we'd have an argument because we haven't had sex for 3 days, or, you know, whatever. Instead of saying, I'm having sex with my partner because I know that it makes them feel good. I know that it bonds us together. It creates this stronger emotional connection, stronger physical connection, and that's what I want to foster. You're still having sex, you're still doing the dishes, but the reason that you're doing it changes the relationship satisfaction, the bond that you have, the compassion that you have for each other, etc. So things to avoid, right? So we know what to do. Now we need to know what not to do. So specifically during conflict, because this is where a lot of my research is heading, things to avoid would be expressing hostility and antagonism. So if you were antagonizing your partner during conflict, it's not going to make things better. It's just going to push them into more conflict. So specific things to look for with hostility and antagonism: always judging and criticizing the person or the things that are important to them. So if they're expressing a concern to you, saying, I really care about this specific thing, I want to change this specific thing. If you just shut them down, if you're very rigid in listening to them, if you're not validating them or trying to see their point of view, it can be really hostile. If you're indifferent or you're just not really committed to doing anything different for the partner, that can be really negative. Making these negative overgeneralizations or interpretations is really key. So if you say things like this example, you never wanted to go to my parents' house in the first place. Well, how do you know, right? You can't just assume that that's what they're feeling. There needs to be some sort of communication to uncover, you know, if they're in a bad mood, maybe it's not because they didn't want to go to your parents' house, it's because something else happened, right? And maybe you need to talk about that instead. These negative overgeneralizations, saying, you never asked me how my day went. That's probably not true, right? There's probably at least one instance where they asked you how your day went. And so if you make statements like that, it might end up being the case that your partner stops asking you how your day goes because you're still not listening to them. You're still not remembering those positive things. And so why put in the effort if it's not going to be received well? And again, that sarcasm piece comes up again, right? So if you're using sarcasm or instigating more conflict, it can be really detrimental. Another thing to avoid is withdrawal. So this is shutting down, right? So you're trying to have a conversation or a conflict comes up and you just say, I don't want to talk anymore, or you walk away, or you leave, or you just sit there and you're not responding, right? You're not even nodding your head anymore. You can't have a conversation. You can't really have an outcome that's beneficial to either one of you if you just simply shut down. So it's really, really bad to withdraw from that conflict or that conversation. So, allowing one person to talk over you or redirect the conversation, oftentimes this also creates like a body withdrawal. So you'll just kind of sink into yourself, also demonstrating that you're not willing to compromise or have a conversation. So things can get worse if you're withdrawing. So all this to say, there's a lot of benefits to healthy relationships. And so here's some of that evidence. This is a current paper that I'm working on talking about what relationships provide for people. And specifically, these relationships don't necessarily have to be romantic, right? They can just be friendships or families that provide support to you. But specifically in a relationship or a romantic relationship, you end up building what's called social capital. So when you engage in a relationship with a partner, they bring a whole lot of support resources to you and you provide the same thing for them. Specifically thinking about things like I have my own friends that I had before my partner has his own friends right before he met me. And so as we merge our lives together, those friendships also tend to merge. And so now I have access to all of his relationships and his social network. He has access to mine. And again, they overlap, they kind of fuse together over time. But there's certain benefits that you gain from having that extended social network. And a lot of these support aspects come up with, you have more people to rely on in case of distress or discomfort. You have more people to rely on in case you need tangible support. So things like a ride to the airport or a loan of $50 to buy groceries or, whatever it might be. Having a partner there for you allows you to build those resources and those benefits, which then ends up lowering a lot of distress, disorder, right? Lower anxiety, lower depression, because you know that you have that social network to rely on, not only in your romantic partner, but again, the extended network that they bring as well. Also, you get healthier coping strategies. So there's a lot of research on the benefits to having a romantic partner in terms of being more likely to exercise and eat healthfully. So they can support your healthy habits. You can work out together. You can hold each other accountable. There's also lower levels of stress, specifically looking at cortisol, which I mentioned before, lower blood pressure, better immune system functioning, right? So on a physiological level, people who are in healthy relationships specifically, right? Again, saying that they're motivated to be in these relationships, they're healthy, you're navigating conflict well, all these things kind of incorporate this outcome. And then potentially living longer, which some people really want, right? As long as you're healthy, why not? And so I want to just quickly discuss this TED Talk that I watched. I can provide a link if people are interested, or you can email me, whatever. But this was from 2017. This woman was doing research in the correlations or the predictors of living a long, healthy life. And she measured all these different things, the top two referring to social relationships. So not only your close relationships being a strong predictor of living longer, but also social integration. And this is super interesting because social integration is referring to just how many people you talk to in a day. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the close relationships, but it's things like, talking to the barista at your coffee shop when they're ringing you out for your coffee, or talking to the person at the grocery store while they're ringing up your groceries, right? So just simply having conversations with, your postal worker or the FedEx driver when they drop off your package. So integrating your life with other people and being social is going to be a strong predictor of staying alive. Now, for those of you having just had research methods or anything like that, obviously correlation does not equal causation. It's a classic phrase in psychology, and it's something to keep in mind. Obviously, all these other things are really important for being healthy. So not smoking, not drinking alcohol, exercising, right? Clean air, no pollution, those are all still really important things. So the mechanism behind what this is actually providing for people at this point may be unknown. There may be a new TED Talk about more relationship research, but I just think it's interesting that is such a strong correlation for living longer. And then something I just learned earlier this week in a virtual conference because, COVID, if you have children, it's also really important for your children's health that you have a healthy relationship with your partner. And so this was a very, very specific study. So it's not just general findings. They did research following children who had asthma across 2 years, and they were looking at not only the parents' perception of their conflict, but also the child's perception of their parents' conflict. And so 2 years go by, and they were looking at lung function. So with children who had asthma, the people who had high conflict in their family still showed an increase in lung function because they're getting older, their lungs are getting bigger and more efficient. But they had lower improvement than the children who were in very healthy households. So with parents who have healthy relationships, there's low conflict, their lung function was significantly greater and more beneficial than those exposed to high conflict. So just one specific example of how your relationship affects other people, specifically children in this case. So that's what I have for you all. Here's my email if you guys want to reach out to me, or we have a few minutes left on the call, so I'm ready to take questions if you want to chat. But thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Yeah.
You have a lot of great data and information on this topic. And like Julie said, if you have any questions, please unmute yourself right now. We have about 7 minutes left. Or feel free to put your question in the chat if you have one.
I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat. So if people need my email, if they want to take a picture or something real quick, you can do that. Stopping sharing in like 3 seconds. Okay. Suggesting to drink water, absolutely. Share the TED Talk link in the chat. Oh, I gotta find it. I'll try to do a quick search here and see what I can come up with.
And there's also a chat asking if you know the TikTok account that had your research on there.
I think it was, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, so I might mess this up. It's Dr. Ina, I think, or Ina. I put that in the chat too. I think it's 2 N's, it might be 1. I have no idea how to search things on TikTok, so I can't provide the link for you.
Awesome. Well, if there are no other, oh, it looks like her account was found at Dr._Ina.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think that she does a lot of TED Talks about research and talking about psychological methods and all sorts of stuff. So it might be a cool account to follow for more than just my research.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, if there are no further questions, we can go ahead and conclude the event. So I first want to thank you all for showing up on a snow day. It's great to see you all, and we hope to see you all at our future events this semester. We have some great things planned. So keep an eye out on our social media for upcoming events, as well as our March newsletter. And I also want to thank you, Julie, for taking the time to talk for PsyChi and PSA again this year. We really appreciate you, and we want to extend our congratulations to you for graduating this semester.
Thank you. Technically, it won't be till summer, but I'll take the congrats now.
Yeah, still this year,
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I hope you all take care and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.